Oh my gosh, what's going on? Was I asleep? I'm thinking that there's something pretty valuable in wondering what it'd be like to just wake up all of a sudden, again, at this time period. I'm trapped in the echo chamber that is the leftist media on my threads, and that was what struck me before I finally got up and felt ready. Gosh, I gotta do that podcast that I've had the notes on for a little while. And in other news, I think I've just felt like far too in a state of kind of perturbation. I've been really bouncing around with some things. I'm getting a new work schedule. I had to move on from something that was kind of stressful, and towards the end of that, I was absolutely kind of haywire and not ready to settle in for what I hopefully will be finding forth. But to start truly and rattle the rust off, understand you're limiting yourself. And you can see when you're testing how you grow through that. A lot of these early episodes are working into the nitty-gritty of how I function, into whether or not the episode is turning out or if it's kind of on the back burner, and whether or not I've been tired or whether or not this new change is going to be positive is something that I'll look for coming in the near future. But I can't say that it's definitely looking promising, and I do have a cool new episode title for the next one, but still, it's like, man, I'm lost. And I think I'm limiting myself in putting these out, but then again, I'm also decidedly rearranging some of like my priorities, and not so perfectly put, but there is much to be said about how I don't want the more important things in my life to fail and to fall into the crevices that might be there if I didn't keep them lively enough into their roots. But that this is a practice. This is much in monitoring my own mental health. It's giving me something to work on, and it's something that I know will take years of practice, hopefully continually putting my effort into the edge of this part of my mind and getting there. But in considering, gosh, well, how am I really progressing? How am I getting this all together? I was thinking I'm kind of limiting myself. But you know what? I'm truly testing myself in a bigger standpoint to observe where I might be able to grow. This week, I had to think Hot Wheels, tiny cars. Not for any particular reason other than that was just the image that came to me. But I think there's something valuable. Ironically, there's a value point in tiny cars, the Hot Wheels, the model of a much bigger technology and energy objected point of transport, that you can have it in a small form. And so I'm thinking that there's maybe even more of like a mental illness into where you look at a car, you have a Hot Wheel, and you find it valuable. There's a twisted part of your brain, I think, that is really calling forth this inspiration that might see a small car and it doesn't transport anything. It still looks really awesome and you can have it on the go. But I guess it's a totem. It's like a small little piece of the mind, But as for where there's the deviation from that being something that is special, or as to where it can go further, I shall leave it for you. Glossary. What began as a play on the word thought, with a T missing at the end, thos, and then with insight jumped to glossary. Bridge the gap into an available comparison with glossary, and finding the root of that word to be glossa, with the meaning of tongue, it invites one to think that thosa might be seen as the mind's tongue, the area of the brain that articulates the motion of an ideological center in our common understanding of the world in which we live. I seek to explore the current occurrency of normal typicality within our mental modes of cognition. I've recorded sound bites to the sound effects of various frequent happenings that I believe will most help a shaping of advance into further parts of speech by looking at where those words of ours start, the events of change that give us pause. I will use those effects in effect to build each weekly episode onto a based segmentation of what comes to inspire best a partition of the week's news and considerable perspective writings that with every prayerful sighting might bring an evolved ability to adorn our expressions of the language in use with greater fluidity and meaning and complexity toward progression. So, with each episode building a more developed approach and ultimately a larger sequencing of our communication, I will examine the bigger points of view and present a glossary of thinking that, with diligence, aligns missing pieces to the puzzle that is society's confusing mix of histories in a form that I think helps put edge to edge and befitting in many flexibilities, gives access to deeper purposing when it seems most impossible at present to see music in the messy with any clarity. Glossary. Crast-hesit, episode 9. Now, what did I just say? I said crast-hesit, has a dash, if you can hopefully see the title. And those are the base forms of procrastination and hesitation. And again, in delving deeper towards, well, gosh, I spent an extra week thinking about the last topic, and what's this feeling? I'm kind of procrastinating. I have hesitation about these things. Last week, frankly, I was not feeling so gung-ho, not nearly confident with that particular set of ideas. This episode, I found that it was going to be a little bit more bright, a little bit more lively, with some kind of comical ideas and ones that are closer to home too. But as for where this is going, I want there to be an exploration of where we view a procrastination as a hesitation, but that it's even also inspired to be a procrastination hesitation, not a hesitation procrastination. Crast did come first in the hesit, and when you think about hesit or crast, the last, the past, even hesitation as there's a missing ation to the pro in the procrast and ination. They're missing similar parts to be broken down here. Firstly, there is, in my understanding about where there is the waiting and even maybe the waiting as time plays itself out, and to have extended the period of time that I was thinking about this to this night now, where I am moving forward and with good possibilities and the best possibilities I've had, so they might remain. I've written much music, and I've found in the inspiration and beyond ideas, but thinking about where an intuitive insight is coming from and where there is a magic of presence when I am improvising. Because if you did not know, I've played the piano and the guitar both for about probably equal amounts of time, but certainly in the many thousands of hours each. And probably several thousands of both of those hours have been largely noodling around, working within theory and bounding myself to a mindset that I hoped would, in the long term, flourish to be something very strong, improvisationally outside of musical theory, not following jazz standards, because I never followed a path of that, but in terms of improvising on an intuition. Within writing and poetry, that's something very common for me as well. But what I found several years ago now at this point was I could almost tell when I was writing a song that somebody was maybe gonna try and learn from me. And I wrote them more into little sound bites in Instagram posts as kind of little mini music videos that I was also kind of blurbing into different YouTube clips that brought a certain essence to what I might have been feeling beforehand, very much coveting that connection between the spirit and where it was coming from. And I very seriously kept those songs that I came to and projected into the public sphere as songs that I felt were ones that maybe other people might also feel similarly inspired, and within intuition positively manifest a magical experience of instant acquisition of the song. Was my vision, was the miracle that I saw maybe happening, as if somebody could be guided by the spirit to pick up one of my songs almost instantaneously. And not songs that are so simple, but songs that do require something of a magic touch, as much as I was trying to build the foundation of where some of those feelings came from, in knowing that it would succeed upon its own empowerment. And that evolved into learning more about how my songwriting was flawed, and largely wrote out more the laws of creation in a way that was hard to swallow and difficult to maintain a sanity about. Kind of ended up feeling kind of, I don't know, I mean, I'm thinking of like at the echo chamber of it, but it was like this hall of mirrors where I was seeing different metaphors refracting into where I wish I'd hadn't said this or that, but at the time when I wrote it, I felt like I have to say this or that. This seems like what the spirit and, well, the inspirational clause of that same kind of spark wanted to say, and I was interested in where that was gonna lead me. I wanted to know, in the truth of it all, what those little hunches were saying. But as I've learned, I must continue on with knowing that there are so much of the practice sessions left to be things that are like a waiting, and have the moments of music that I could probably go, oh, well, let me try and like workshop this. Any musician or someone that's keyed into today's studio realms, production is very familiar with, oh, let's workshop this idea and let's try and get a song out that we can get off the ground, hopefully. And I've always disavowed that kind of mentality for music. In fact, I've gone more towards believing that because you can't know where that spark is in that song unless it burns and it hits you like an urge to communicate and drop everything. And the last great guitar song that I wrote, I felt like I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I received very weird visions, and I decided to not continue walking into work that day, and I called in sick. I went home and I spent like an hour writing out the pieces that were there. And that's not something I can really do anymore, and frankly, maybe, and this was over 2 years ago, around 2 years ago maybe, that in its essence, in its alarm, it actually is not something that I can continue doing. But that was how seriously I did take that most complete song that I put together last, and it had some of the best riffs that I'd ever felt like in that fire, that avalanche of a moment that likened itself to an episodic rebirth of that improvisation into something that I needed in that moment. The way that my balance in the spirit realm was falling into an issue was such that the only thing that was gonna salvage the balance again, I'd say it as, maybe beyond, was going to be to create something really with all of the highest potential that I was living at. And, well, as if I could contend that my highest potential is unhealthy at times. I wish it could be better, but there is a magic at writing music, all caps writing, where it's not a procrastination. If you were to say procrastination is putting something off until it's just the right time to do it in relation to a deadline. And it's not a hesitation, as much as it's sort of just working around to the point of it. But it is certainly involving a medium point where the skills need to be present. You need to be nurturing your opportunities to create, and out of the blindness of it all, maybe, that there isn't a timeline that you or anybody could see. But there's something special about maybe even just centering on the rawness of this crast, It's just the center point of procrastination, but crast-hesit. It's a whole new playing field. Maybe it's an XY axis, or one and the other are orthogonal, perpendicular. But what are you really missing in those moments where you're waiting and something isn't happening towards a goal, or you understand that you weren't quite ready to do it, so you don't jump into it? I think you're missing time. But in terms of what you're missing is the focus and the bottom line, I think, is where that focus should turn to in that moment. But I think you can really take this crast-hesit as a continuum where, okay, well, I'm procrastinating right now, and maybe we're to lean on this fact that procrastination is a pro thing. Like, there's something much into professionalism or procurement that PRO is something that stands a strong test of resiliency and a qualitative kind of evaluation that when you fall into the hesit, the crast-hesit is something that you can kind of think about where you're more or less operating on. And maybe, hesitation might be in a much grander scale of where you're praying and you are meditating more in a place that you don't understand, but the higher power in your feelings and your instincts does know. But I also thought maybe you could take it as a commodity. And with commodity, I'm not thinking about it as you normally think about a commodity. I wanted to think about commodity, separating it more into the mod, the modifying, the moderating, and reframe what commodity really is getting at. So calm, much as it's kind of like calm can typically start you on a little bit more of a path of opposition, and then there's something that is much more communicating, right? Calm, the calm systems, but that the modity and the mod of it desires the fact that there is that calm, communicative commodifying. Maybe if we think with the if-ire, we can make headway here. That it's not that, though. It's the ity, commodity. No bad feedback. So bad feedback here. If you're to think about that moment where you're hesitating, because I don't think we're maybe ready to say, in that moment that there's a hesit, or crast, what are we? That there's a feedback there that you're responding to, something that doesn't feel right, or something that is being weighed out, or, it's turning over itself into this phenomenon. It's being brought to be played out in this realm of crast-hesit. 'hesit. 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 if you were to think about it as bad feedback, it doesn't have to be bad, per se. So, no bad feedback. I think that could be on a t-shirt. Or at least, it stands to be somewhat of a motto. And encouraging of feedback. Much to be pointed towards this episode, this new glossary term, to say that it revolves around a certain sense of feedback, something that is going to be maybe your projection into the world and your impart. I like that word. That is reliantly refocusing, again, to say that it has to do with the focus. And not to be within a trivial, where bad feedback, and whether viewing it with the positive lens, like good vibes only, everything's a good vibe, I guess. The next total oomph of no bad feedback is probably this hunch, as the knock knock is this week's hunch, that crast-hesit, it interjects a value point where you operatively say, this is not bad feedback on me. Hesitating in a moment before a jump or before something that there's an imminent need for doesn't have to be the bad feedback, with a sense that we're understanding crast, I want to say too. That the pairing of these two ideas, crast-hesit, in a way that is most bare bones to the fact of their similarities, is a key point in building this idea. But no bad feedback. No bad feedback. No. There is something interesting about putting two adjectives together. Especially, two of the same adjective, I mean. But for another time, let us think about crast-hesit. And what else do we need to refine in this question of their connection, their commodity, as we were saying, that serves it best, serves it right to make true purpose of that weight, of that change to the patterns within more than time, the focus. Let it be but nothing but a question on what might have been. I was torn between the two of these segmentations where it's let it be and, well, let it be. that is but a ... question mark. And also the particular instance where there is a comma there, where it's let it be, but what is the ... question mark that is there? And so what I'm saying really more with that is like the let it be, but this is one point of it where there is this negative operation where there's the else statement I'm speaking as the but. So basically saying let it be the ... question mark, or let it be, but well, what else is there? And so I think the fact that these are two different things, we kind of want to aim and say that the crast and the hesit represent both of them. And so the crast, speaking with what we understand, the procrastination, that it is more of a teleological and end-focused point of view. Maybe we'd want to say that the hesitation is a little bit more founded at the origin of that person's feelings and actions, whether it be what comes to be fearful or within deeper mental consideration and a thoughtfulness that makes one say, not yet. It's also really important right now to say, okay, it's a focus. What are we focusing on? Are we allowing that feeling in this weird little realm here to do what it maybe needs to do in this time, to allow for a passage of sort of maybe inverse focus, right? Because it's much to be said that there's a lack of focus that might be present in regards for where the next goal, the next planned activity, action, activifier is then realistically trying to be in a bigger point of view for that time period, or at least playing a interesting calculation out that maybe building this realm of crast-hesit into one's higher mentalities, the brain operations. I've learned recently in a podcast that I heard about that this intuitive thing that I'm even talking about here in trying to tap into where I'm deriving these ideas is something that exists higher in what is largely a subconscious kind of calculative part of our brain called the basal ganglia, if I'm so blessed, that is typically used for deciding more simple evaluations about what's the best way to move in a manner in some sort of obstacled field. But there's a higher part of that operation that's been used to determine where that spark can occur, that those seemingly random moments where the solution to something is more or less played out within some sort of reception, that there is this altogether point of the mentality of that space has a higher point of its usage, but it's still that same kind of thing that has been tested in the scene lighting up in those particular thought constructs. But the mentality here, that thought construct here, is that when we build a crast-hesit part of our brain, that there will be greater order, I think, is something that is moseying itself out of this episode. But within the focus, within this anti-focus or inverse focus, or the executive functioning that says, okay, everything should be working as it should be, let it be. Run the code, run the normal, everything is orderly, and let's take a look out the window. Or are we curious about what, to me, that double dot is largely a sense of duality. It's an equal and opposite kind of thing. It's a 1 and 2. A common 2 point of view is that there is something that should match it more or less. And if you think about the number 2, it's even really kind of beautifully, kind of half of a heart, if you will, into the future. But aside, there is this dot dot, and well, what is it? Let it be but dot dot. Let it be but that duality. Let it be what else would be there. Or should there be a question about what's there? I think the question about what's there would have to be the hesitation. The let it be is the present focused sense of where you are existing, but well, what else is there? The hesitation certainly more is, okay, well, what is the opposing mystery there? But let it be but dot dot question mark is the crast. And so if you can really try for me, the let it be but dot dot question mark, the procrastination for me largely, as I've gone through school and exercised my procrastinative abilities, I think it's more or less common to say, okay, well, I was making the most of my time. I was putting off that stress till right when I really wanted to engage with that fight or flight response and make it happen, while doing the other things that more felt more like the letting it be, more like, well, what is my present being? And again, we're just trying to build this sense, this crast-hesit understanding, to try and further a conclusion made here. But if you're trying to let it be, but the dot dot and the question mark, I think it's a little bit more focused on something selfish. So, as this has been the unlock section of it, and we've walked into this realm where it's like, well, both of these have some higher ordered realisms. Again, I hope we start to see that this crast-hesit is within focus, and it's within continuum, and it is within also a commodity, if we can put our finger on that. be crast-hesit. So we've added the pro back in. We're going to try and start trying to construct a little bit more with also hesitat. So you think about hesitation, I'm taking off that ION at the end, and I'm trying to say that, okay, well now we're ending with a T on both of them. So incorporating the fact that I certainly wanted to say that it was procrast-hesitat and not hesitat-procrast, we can open up a sense to say, okay, well, there's this commodifying procrast, the adjective, into the hesitat, but it is all about hesitation. And so this is a little insight into the fact that I've certainly thought that it's much more reasonable, much more intuitive. What else is there? The fact of saying that procrastination is a hesitation, I think, is something that is more logical. But as for where there's then the procrast, it almost sounds a little bit like progress. But I think I would want to say, okay, well, the CR for me is something that's very much like a manifesting seedling. Because for me, I think about the sea, and I think about kind of a concave mirror that is functionally, if you've seen that little frog, creating a holographic image of what exists beyond it in the future. And the R for me is always going to be this thing that's kind of reaching out and saying that within the operation of it all, that it is a stepping, verbaceous point forward. So the CR, it's something that is largely making something forth off of what is actually forth already too. But the ast, as much as we can think about, well, what is past? What is last? What's the bastion? But I sort of lean a little bit towards seeing an as T, that there is a T, something that really brings something positively grounded into the future of itself, that is going to maybe need some more of your time to think about. But within just our understanding of procrastination, and that meaning, trying to do a little bit more of an exercise of reverse engineering where these words would really be telling us they're saying this and that, we could maybe say that this act of looking at the end goal and making it something that, in some way, past and last are very put together. There's a P there and there's an L there. The last is the deadline, so it's very easy to think about that as the wall. And the past is something that is largely already very circularly grounded into its base form, that, as we know its meaning, it's not changing. The past is as it exists. But the CR, again, let's think about that. The CR is kind of like this hooded mirrors kind of game, where there is an understanding of what's going on towards the end, and there's an R, and as far as it's also an ast. Maybe we could think about there's this linearity about ast in our world. And as we try and tap into what this ast is, much as it's also like a AST, if you were to try and group the latter two of those, you could even say that it is also an at with an S existing to create bonding on S's principle. but at its total, it still is also what we would describe as act. I'm really getting into, the ways that I have very significantly tested the words of our usage, but I think we can actually kind of really see that the procrast, if pro is to be what we would just say is 100% doing the best job that you ever could, that procrast, and then ination, we don't really use procrast, do we, right? Yeah. But procrastination is largely still, I think, agreeably focused in the fact that we are completing what we need to on the timeline with the knowledge of there to be an end goal. But if we're just using that as an adjective, which maybe might make more sense because we're saying that procrastination is, as we know, to be much more of a verbaceous noun, it's the act of procrastinating, that it being the adjective towards hesitat, then we sort of need to know what hesitat is. And if hesitat is just missing that ion towards the finish there, I think we can say that there is maybe a reason to say that hesitat is kind of a verbic kind of thing. We'd almost say that hesita is more of like our common verb, like production, I don't know, that was a guess, but the tion is something that makes a noun of a verb. I say with some degree of assumption and short-sightedly for possible variations in our language, but all be procrast-hesitat. And hesitat, again, I hope you tip it off as it's a little bit more than a verb, but it is not the shun of it. It comes to its point. And is that the positive? Is that the ideal into what crast-hesit, with a dash in between the episode's title here, offers? I think quite possibly. It is the light turning on, and as I like to forward, then as we turn on that light, sometimes things are shocking and we can't necessarily see it all at once. What an interesting new sight to see as we put these two waitings into one sense and understand their connection. We don't know this word. We don't know this word. We don't really have a sense for what the crast comes from, do we? In procrastination, if we're to think about our normal word roots, and the origins of those largely being things that we can trace linguistic meaninghoods upon, I looked up what crast might be, and I'm more focused on that. The hesitation, I think we might need a whole nother episode, frankly, but I looked up crast and I was presented with, oh, did you mean to say cast? As in an arm cast, a formation that holds a scaffolding, or maybe it's also like a fish cast. It's sending out the thing to be retrieved. I also saw craft, like an arts and crafts kind of word, that crafting is something that there's a building. There is only the varied F instead of the S there. So maybe there's a tie into all that. But most interestingly, I saw that it wanted to present to me the Greek origin of a word that presented crast as a connective point of where we hear Christ, crast, Christ, crust, crust. And then when you think about the he sit at, the hesitant that we were just thinking about, as much as I wanted there to be a sense of, okay, well, this is where God tells you sit. This is where God says, hold off. Some part of your feeling, some part of your connection is saying, position, pasit, sit. Don't go yet. But do we not have those in other areas? No, we do. But we have other words that kind of exist in a shroud. But for the words that we don't know, the uncoverings of which so to be seen in their best kept secrets, I think it's cool that with this episode we've seen crast-hesit and procrastination tied to hesitation breathe a little bit more common sense and an exploration in the ways that we can look at our letters and seek the more interesting meanings of our inspirations to them that only shall so be seen by those that operate with, I think, the best sense of crast-hesit. Hesitate. I'm sorry. I have one of my cats just meowing so carefully outside my door to have my heart, and I try and hold the titanium, the part of my mind that can hold that off, but yes. However, the crast-hesit in Light's inspired attempts into new words we're gonna get to are quite loaded shuffle. And by that, I mean I'm gonna take a few steps back and try and hold on to my marbles for the fact that I'm not gonna say exactly what came to mind for these. This week's shuffle. Psych, I'm gonna reveal the ones that I did. I'm just not gonna leave it out there for those that don't take the time to hear me. Because, well, they're a little bit sensitive. Sensitive? I don't know. They're just revealing. Personally revealing. At least. Number 1. The mindset. So we think about mindset. We think mindset is one word. It's where we keep things in the gross generalization for a certain task, right? But the mindset, we could be thinking about the way that the group of our objects, the objectivities in our thoughts, the set is within a mind, or we could be thinking about the mind set, where we're more thinking about how many different types of minds we have. It's sort of just a little tidbit. I think it might lead into further topics, but as we've discussed in these sort of twofold things of continuums, let's leave it as something that, with those two different thoughts, the set within the mind or the mind of many possible sets. Let's try and think a little bit more like that, I think. Number 2, the bipolar express. So, the express form, the expedited, the fast, the no nonsense, we're getting to the destination form of bipolar disorder is an interesting idea, right? But I was actually more thinking about, well, with the poles of the planet, and I thought of the bipolar express, thinking, I guess, supposedly the North Pole and the South Pole. What if there was a train, much like the Polar Express, that took people to the North Pole at a really rapid rate? I'm thinking like the line, the Saudi Arabian New Age population center that was largely, something that they started pretty seriously. I know. But to have a train that goes along the latitudinal lines to the North Pole or to the South Pole as fast as possible, I think it would be a trip. I think it would be something that, given the maximum possible speed that would be there, you would, really probably want to look at some interesting physics, because when you look at the Coriolis effect in physics, that's exactly how you start deriving the matrix-formed linear algebra of it all. But the real polar express, how about that? Number 3, aged I'm a superhero complex. So this idea, I was thinking about how it's kind of a very common way of growing up as we look towards our different idols and we are thinking about the careers that we want to be doing. There are the times we also get confused, and we, as kids, look at things that aren't real or within fantasy or serving other purposes of being not real, maybe too. But there's dressing up as Superman for Halloween, or there's having weird beliefs about your potential to be Batman, and how the story arcs that we see in those really idolized stories and, comics, wherever, there is a tipping point towards wanting different things that a superhero has had to suffer, really, I'm saying, because we see those as the things that built them as superheroes. But as we get older, that complex doesn't so go away, but it does age. And so, not speaking so much about we see these idols of our community and we want to be this career or that because we sense resonance, at its base. But those things that we don't see as realistic in our logic are things that are still capturing our attention as we grow up. But as that complex ages, and well, as susceptible or not an individual has the potential of being tied up in this whole complex, I'm saying, is relevant, but I really just maybe I think want to leave it with you that to think about it like a fine wine or something that is somewhat entertaining and offers up its beauty for the moments. There is a sense that it ages, and well, maybe that's where it's best. Number 4, everyone's planning. Always planning. In some sense, planning is kind of really worth saying it's like inverse of this crast-hesit kind of place. Planning is taking over that sense that those feelings that you had that were telling you to hold off were going to get you towards the end in the way that you wanted. Right? Planning is saying, okay, well, towards the end of the goal, I need to have this and that, and well, I must plan this out. But always are planning too. And there's a song that contains the lyric, I worship the way. And so I guess I'm speaking into, there's many different ways, and maybe I should be saying all way. All way. Yahweh. I think we're confused. But they're planning. And it's a little bit shocking. But we all have a sense of planning within our mentalities, and as we've tried to rise above those more basic modes of thought, we've gained further appreciation for our abilities to hold memory over different procedural outcomes, and where this crast-hesit hopefully holds its own is that there's an element of crast-hesit in everything. Is there? I'm not sure. I was just saying, everyone's planning. Always planning. To me, I think it wraps itself up well when you see it as one all as a word, one ways as a word, and then planning. Without the G at the end even, because to some sense, everyone's planning. You think of, okay, well, everyone's planning. Everybody out there is directed, is organizing. But then you think always planning. The planning brings an ease. And you sort of think, oh, well, there's more than just everyone planning. Everybody has their own ways, and all those ways, if ways are maybe the intermediary of everybody's one plan, you can still very much trust that there are all those ways, and they're planning. So as it goes, we can't control that. So, number 5, late stage alcoholism. I didn't say that it was alcoholism in my post-it notes. That doesn't need to be something that everybody is tapping into here. But I was thinking about the serenity prayer that is turning my will, my life over to God as I understood Him in more of the serenity to change the things that I can. But as we work towards that willful way planning and acceptance of all the said just ways. There's something interesting about how alcoholism turns itself into something, again, aged. And we'll, starting with where you start to drink and what that teaches oneself about just to swing forward because it's here, the hesitations and the needs to build one's planning into moments that are outside of the time when you're actually doing it, right? I mean, you can plan, okay, we're going to go here, we're going to go here, we're going to get home. Or as you're trying to pour yourself a glass of milk, you're going, okay, well, I know I'm going to have to pour it. But I'm putting the milk glass down, and I am going to hold on to the railing here, and I know I have to keep it here. I've already been planning to pour it before I started, and you kind of realize that, I think, a little bit more when you're under the influence. That's a way that you can think, but I think as then you transcend more towards the aspect that it's going to involve AA, and you learn a little bit more about that the only solution for it in today's day and age is to keep leaning into it. And to realize that you can't unlearn kind of what has already been there. But that's sort of just saying that it was always going to teach you something too. And as it gets into that late stage, yeah, you might not be an alcoholic, but the alcoholism still evolves. And you shouldn't take it for granted outside the need of its observation as an illness, as something that was going to be a part of you. And that's just a little tidbit into where I still believe that all the many drugs that should be treated as medicine and helpful still should have a negative perspective on them, whether they are more or less illegal or not, or you kind of look at yourself as that recovering alcoholic, for example, and there always holds this reverence. Number 6, eternal CPR, a nested pass down. So if you're unfamiliar with the term pass down, it's simply that sense of changing of the guard or the passing of the torch is the need for there to be the transference and the translation, maybe even too, of knowledge. But a nested pass down is sort of like there's this continual redirection into its next form, but it was always intrinsic. It was always within what was already going to be there. But I was saying eternal CPR. So cardiopulmonary resuscitation, I'm saying, has an aspect that is eternal. And I took my first aid, CPR, AED, adult and pediatric class this last little break between episodes, and thinking about, well, where is the next thing that we just realized, like, in the instance of it, we can do from more of an outside perspective. Because what are we doing? We're continuing to beat the heart, essentially, by compressing it and the lungs to direct blood around the body, that we also are oxygenating as we are increasing the volume of the lungs and allowing the weight of gravity to exhale. But I had to think about, okay, well, when did we realize, oh, well, that's what we should do if somebody isn't breathing and is unresponsive? And, well, then also, might not have a pulse. The eternality, the eternal nature, the fact that it goes beyond itself is something that might connect a little bit to that late stage alcoholism and this aged aspect of our needs that truly struck someone someday. But is everything eternal as we so think about eternal and being long-lasting? But before it had its inception, another common thing I've said here already is, was it already there? Was it influencing the way that evolution was transcending its attempts into further generations? There are things that we won't lose, right? The eternal bond had been formed. And there's something cool about having that within your understanding, I would say. Number 7, the calculus on it. It gets thrown around, you gotta do the calculus on it, this or that. I'd hope, like this eternal thing, that as we all get smarter and supposedly people are learning things earlier and earlier, we could all realize how important it is to learn calculus. And, well, Brian May, is he the guy? Is he Isaac Newton? Or is he just really related? I was thinking about that recently. The guitarist for Queen, he totally looks like Isaac Newton at this point in time. And it's kind of funny to me. But the limits, the derivatives, the integration, it's important that we can understand how we might anticipate our expectations on the world. So I part and leave on good blessing that don't take all of those little sayings so unseriously, as you can probably bring a focus, the hefty knowing into where you get the picture and might crast-hesit be a new realm in which you get to try and own it like a sharp knife, and all the different skills that come to need what I think is largely unforgotten and misacknowledged mental acuity that we're constantly becoming, for better or for worse, but always with focus.